All right, now that you're looking at houses, let's take a quick review of the paperwork that'll be coming your way. We want you to be as familiar as possible with the paperwork so that we can submit offers with speed and confidence. The paperwork package includes the purchase offer contract, the purchase offer addendum form, the property condition disclosure, the 4-in-1 addendum, the mold disclosure, COVID disclosures, fair housing disclosure, agency disclosure, lead paint disclosure, and additional property information disclosure. Now let me run you through these. First, we have the purchase offer contract. This is the contract that binds you and the seller together in this deal. This is a legally binding document and becomes fully enforceable after the attorney review period. The first few sections lay out the basics. We will pre-fill in these sections to include your name, the seller's name, the property info, and so on. The purpose of this section is to make sure we are definitely writing an offer for the correct house. Section 3 details out exactly what items we want the house to come with. Ideally, we will submit our offer to include everything, and the seller can counter back if there's something they want to take with them. They would just scratch out that item we initial it. The 4th and 5th section is the price you're offering for the home and whether or not you're going to ask for any concessions from the seller. This part can get a little confusing, so let me explain. Concessions are a credit that can be used to reduce a buyer's closing costs or down payment. We are allowed to ask the seller for concessions up to 6% of your offer price. The normal use of concessions is to roll in your closing costs. This means if you're going to offer the seller $100,000 for their house and you want to roll in your closing costs into your loan, then we put $106,000 on the price section on line 4. This is advantageous to you, the buyer, because it keeps more cash in your pocket and allows you to finance that money at an incredibly low interest rate. This is advantageous to the seller because it increases the pool of eligible buyers who can make an offer on their home. The only caveat to this is that the home must appraise for $106,000 now instead of $100,000. If it underappraises, then the seller could make you pay for your closing costs out of pocket, or you could refuse and make them come down on price, or God forbid, neither side budges and the deal falls through. Regardless, think of these sections as follows. Price minus concessions equals the real amount you're offering the seller. The 6th section discusses the earnest money deposit. The standard area is $500 to $1,000. This is a refundable deposit that is normally held by your agent's broker. These funds are used towards your closing costs at the end of the loan. Fortunately, these funds can be refunded to you for a variety of different reasons. Really, the only way you lose this money is if you flat out walk from the deal or intentionally refuse to do what's required to purchase the home. Section 7 is broken up into 3 parts that are all related to the type of financing you'll be using. Section A is the most common one used, which tells the seller what loan program you'll be using and how much you're financing. Section B is for owner financing options, which is when the seller agrees to sell you the property on terms as if they were the bank. And Section C discusses a penalty the buyer must pay the seller to recoup costs in the event the buyer doesn't follow through with the loan. This section is not normally used in our area, but definitely talk to your agent if it comes back to you guys with an amount in the blank line. Section 8 is the home sale contingency line. This section is only used if you currently own a house and need to sell it before you can buy a new home. Sellers aren't thrilled when they see an offer coming in with a home sale contingency. The seller may accept your offer and start working with you, but they will always reserve the right to drop your offer if something else comes in. I would recommend making sure you have an offer on your home already before submitting offers. It makes it much easier to get your new offer accepted and less likely that a seller would drop your deal and work with a new offer if it comes in. Section 9 discusses the projected closing date. Think of this as the goal line marker. This is the date the bank and attorneys will focus on when working to close your loan. Please be aware that there's a lot of moving parts in the real estate transaction. We almost never land on the date specifically. Sometimes it's a few days early, but sometimes it's a few weeks late. The closing date is set by the attorneys and the bank and is usually announced within 1 week ahead of time. However, sometimes it can be announced 1 day before the closing date. Please make sure you're in constant communication with your loan officer and loan processor. They're in direct communication with the bank's attorney, and they're the ones who set the closing date. Section 10 simply states that the house is yours after you sign the closing documents and the bank wires the money. Section 11 is a time limit you give the sellers to respond to your offer. Your contract can be considered null and void if they respond to your offer after the date listed on this section. Section 12 states that the seller will provide the buyer with a survey if they have one. It also states who is responsible for paying for a survey in the event that one doesn't exist. Basically, it states that the buyer must pay for it if their bank requires it. The seller must pay for it if it's necessary to sell the property as advertised. This usually happens if they're selling a bigger piece of property and need it subdivided. Section 13 and 14 goes into title work and the type of deed that will be transferred to the buyer. The seller will be required to provide you with an abstract, which is a 40-year history on the property. The attorneys will review this to make sure no one else has claim to the property. They'll also make sure it comes lien and judgment free. If these conditions are met, then the seller will give you a warranty deed, which is the best kind of deed you can get. It means that your house is guaranteed to be free of any liens or issues. Section 15, 16, and 17 talk about zoning prorations and what happens if the property burns down while you have it under contract. Essentially, the seller is agreeing that the house is zoned properly for its intended use. They're also agreeing to prorate any prepaid taxes, fuel, and water bills to the date you two close on. And last but not least, the buyer is not held to the contract if the house burns down. The house is still the responsibility of the seller up until the buyer signs the closing docs and it's recorded with the county. Section 18 is a longer one and goes into all the contingencies of the contract. It's split up into 3 sections. Section A is the attorney review period. The state requires a minimum of 3 days. This allows both sides 3 days to give the fully executed contract to their attorney for review. The attorney will have the right to suggest changes or recommend canceling the contract out completely. Section B is the test and inspection section. This section outlines all the different types of tests you can conduct during the inspection period. You and your agent will decide a time frame that you will have to get your inspection complete. You'll then have a new time frame to submit your repair request to the seller. You'll also identify the dollar amount per incident that's required in order to ask for it to be repaired. This doesn't mean you can't ask for cheaper repairs. It just means the seller can completely refuse it and still remain in compliance with the contract. Section C outlines when you'll be allowed to do your final walkthrough inspection. This happens 1 to 2 days before closing. This is your time to make sure the home is still in good condition and nothing has been changed, damaged, or removed. Section 19 outlines which real estate brokerages are involved in the transaction. Section 20 uses clear language that this is an enforceable binding contract once signed by both parties. Section 21 is the buyer's acknowledgement that they've been provided the agency disclosure and the property disclosure for review. Section 22 is where you identify if you're buying the house as your primary residence or if it's an investment property. If it's for an investment, then the seller must certify whether or not there's 60 plus days past due on the mortgage of this home. Section 23 is a list of additional provisions of the contract. Very briefly, these are: the contract can't be modified without written consent from both buyer and seller. This contract cannot be assigned to a different buyer without consent from both the buyer and seller. This contract supersedes all handshake agreements or verbal agreements made. The contract is legal per New York State law, and both sides must sign or initial for any changes to be made. Once you're comfortable with all of this, please sign, date, and fill out your complete mailing address, phone number, and email. Line 24 will identify which brokerage firm is holding your deposit. The next section is where the seller will either accept your offer as is or counter your offer. Once you both agree to the terms and price, they will sign and fill out their personal information. Next is where we fill out the attorney information for both sides. We will also fill out all the brokerage info and your lender's info. And that's it for the purchase offer. The next doc is the contract addendum. This is a blank document where you can fill in any request or change. The beautiful thing about real estate is that nearly everything is negotiable. Just make sure you get it on paper and that both sides sign it. Up next is the property condition disclosure. This is where the seller must disclose any known issues with the house. I'm not going to dive deep into this, but please look through it carefully. The seller should answer a lot of questions you might have on the condition and the age of certain components of the house. They can also include a list of upgrades here as well. Next, we have the 4-in-1 addendum. This document has 4 addendum items on one document and gives you basic information on the house. They are: does the property have electric service to it? Are there any utility surcharges to your property? Utility surcharges occur when a large installation of utility goes into your house. Instead of them charging you $10,000 for it, they break it down into small payments that you can manage. The thing to know with this is that bill transfers from owner to owner. The next is the home in an agricultural district? And then the last one is, Are there any uncapped natural gas wells on the property? This form will come to you the same as the others. Please sign the appropriate areas. Number 4 is the mold disclosure. Essentially, this states that there is no mold in the property as far as the sellers know. Number 5 is the COVID disclosures. These talk about what happens to the contract in the event of delays or circumstances that occur due to COVID. Number 6 is the fair housing disclosure. This goes into fair housing law and states that the seller is not allowed to discriminate when selling their house. Number 7 is the agency disclosure. This document explains all the different forms of agency. Your agent will identify the relationship with you. This means that their fiduciary duty, it will always be with you. Number 8 is the lead paint disclosure. This is only required on properties older than 1978. This states that lead paint is dangerous. Basically, the seller will mark whether or not they've ever had a lead paint assessment done on the house. Then you'll initial if you've received the lead paint pamphlet educational piece and whether you wish to conduct a lead paint assessment or if you'd like to waive that. Discuss this with your agent. Number 9 is the additional information document. This answers basic questions such as utility costs, but not all sellers fill this out though, so if you don't see it, don't worry. And that concludes the paperwork section. Please contact us anytime if you have any questions about anything in these documents. Your agent will be sending them all through DocuSign or filling them out with you in person. As always, thank you very much for your time. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you ever have any questions. I will be sending you information on the next step of the process, so have a great day.